Do that. So today's speaker is, in fact, maybe I'll start off with a question or a statement that maybe you'd agree with. You have your own archives, personally, and perhaps you haven't even thought about it. You have personal papers, maybe scrapbooks, old photo albums, meaningful artifacts from your past. Those are your archives, your personal archives. And we have some very nice archives here in the Schmidt House, too. Down in the basement, we have a climate-controlled archives room with all the paperwork and photos and different things from years and years of Olympia brewery history. And we're working with the city of Tumwater on the Tumwater Historical Archives also. So it's just an important part of our personal lives and our family and our community history. And so it only seemed appropriate that we begin our new season of talks learning from an expert in archives. And that's Tracy. Tracy Rebstock's the Southwest Regional Archivist, Washington State Archives, right here in Olympia. She's a transplant from Ohio, moving to our state in 2008 in Spokane, and then moved to Olympia in 2013. Tracy holds a BA in History from the University of Cincinnati, MLIS from Kent State University, and MA in Public History from Eastern Washington University. And she enjoys helping researchers learn about the holdings in the Washington State Archives and how to find things and research your genealogy and those types of things. So she gets to find some wonderful stories and treasures from those rich archives in our state buildings there. And I'm looking forward to her sharing about those with us. So let's welcome Tracy Rebstock. Thank you.
As Don said, I am the Southwest Regional Archivist for the Washington State Archives here in Olympia. I always tell people that you have twice the fun of archives, because not only do we have the Southwest Regional Branch in Olympia, but we also have the state archives that hold the state government records here in Olympia. So the archives of Washington State are administered by the Secretary of State's office, and we are a public trust. And there is a state archivist. Our state archivist is Steve Excel, and our deputy state archivist is Terry Badger. And the idea is to collect records from all the government agencies. State government agencies are required by law to turn their records over to the archives, and local government entities are strongly urged, but not necessarily beholden to that law. But a lot of the local governments have decided to turn their records over to us, and so we have a nice, rich collection. If you go to the Secretary of State's website, that's where you can find us. You can also do a search for Washington State Archives in Google, but we're under the programs and divisions on the Secretary of State's website, and Secretary of State has the corporations, they have elections, they have the state library also with a lot of rich records. So we are the only state in the 50 states that has a regional branch archive system. For some people, this is a source of great disappointment, and for others, they rejoice. So mostly the people who live in the eastern and central regions, they're very excited. They don't have to drive all the way to Olympia to look at records. So what the different regional branches collect the local government records from their area, and then all of the state government entities end up sending their stuff to Olympia. So we have a branch on the Eastern Washington University in Cheney, that holds the Eastern Regional Branch and our digital archives. And again, the digital archives is actually another one of its kind at this point, although more and more states are starting to get this. But our digital archives actually put current records up on the archives, and that's kind of neat. So as they're created electronically, they end up electronically being put up on the digital archives. So a lot of the county auditors put up records on that site. Our Central Regional Branch is in Ellensburg on the campus of Central Washington University. Our Northwest Regional Branch is in Bellingham on the Western Washington University. Our Puget Sound Regional Branch is on the Bellevue Community College campus. And then we have Southwest here at Olympia on the Capitol campus. A lot of people have difficulty finding our building because if you're driving down Capitol Boulevard, you cannot see our building. We are underground. So if you look at the Tivoli fountain and then look directly across the street, there's a grove of trees. That is our roof. So we are submerged. So back in 1963 when the building was finished, it was actually both a fallout shelter for for Cold War era, as well as the archives. So kind of a fun building. So if you go to our website and take a look, you can search the collections. I always tell people this is kind of unfriendly, as far as I'm concerned, way to look for records, because you have to know which government entity created the records you're looking for. So usually I tell people just disregard the whole searching part, and you'll see up there I have a little red arrow where it says Ask an Archivist. It will generate an email, and you can ask your question about what you're looking for, and it will remember the words that you're typing, and it will direct it to the appropriate archives where those records may be held. So just remember that Ask an Archivist button. We are actually working on our website, so hopefully at some point we will have it a little more user-friendly. But if you do just want to do a keyword search, oftentimes you can type in anything, Bolt Decision, Mount St. Helens, anything like that, and you will get a search that brings back a whole bunch of records. Now, not all those records are going to be located here in Olympia. Some of them are going to be located in one of our different branches. So a lot of times it's good to look at the front two letters, or it's good to generate an email to say, hey, where are these records exactly, before you come to Olympia and say, expect to look at something about Cheney or Washington or Spokane, for instance. This is our Southwest Regional Branch site, and again, I've got that Ask an Archivist button really prominent on the page, so if you do want to ask a question about that, you can, but you can also click on View a Listing of the Southwest Collections, and it will give you a listing of all of the different types of collections that we hold by government entity. So it's an alphabetical list of, for instance, Olympia municipal records, or Tumwater municipal records, Thurston County records. So once you click in, this is kind of a little screenshot of what that looks like. So for instance, if you clicked on the Tumwater Municipal Government, it'll show the different types of records we have from the city clerk, from the museum, from the police department, from the public works department, and then you can kind of start, once you click on any one of those, it'll give you a big list of the types of records we hold. And again, I cannot stress enough, you see that Ask an Archivist button up there. That just makes it a whole lot easier if you go for that, unless you kind of start to understand how records are created. And that's the other big thing. As an archives, we are collecting government records. So it's thinking about, well, how do either the people I'm researching or the topic that I'm researching, how did it have some sort of cross-section with government? So it's not like we're going to have a collection about a specific house and have a whole file on it, but there might be records about the house in the assessor's records or in a tax roll, or there may be a photograph, but they're all going to be kind of spread out a little bit. We may have ownership, but you're going to have to look through the deed volumes or general indexes, different things like that. So it's not in just one nice, neat little package. And then again, I'm showing this website again as the keyword search, and then that Ask an Archivist button up there. The other thing is you can, in fact, select under the collections, if you want to definitely keep your search to Olympia or the Southwest collection or the state collection, you can actually select that before you do your keyword search to see what sorts of things are there. So researching in an archive, I tell people that sometimes this is very intimidating sometimes. I don't know, how many of you guys have visited an archive before? A few of you guys have. So when you come to visit us, while we very much want you to come in, it does not seem that way, because as you walk in the front door, the door is locked. So there's no way for you to actually walk in until there's a little buzzer and you let us know you're coming. We totally want you to come. It's just to help protect the records. A lot of these records are one of a kind. It's for security for both the staff and the records inside. And then we usually ask not to drop in, mostly because we have outgrown our building. So we have 2 off-site facilities where we hold additional records. So sometimes the records that you're asking for may not be physically in the building. So we need to go ahead and order the boxes in. So a lot of times it's good to call or email in advance and to kind of talk about what you're researching, and then we can kind of talk about when a good day might be. Now, that doesn't mean that when you show up unannounced, we're going to go, sorry, you have to go away. That is not the case. We'll still talk to you, and we'll probably, usually what I do with people is we have a little brainstorming session about what are you researching, what sorts of records are you looking for, what things may be actually here in the building, and then what things you have to come back for. So don't let that locked door scare you. And then we also will take all of your belongings from you when you come in. so then you're really feeling like this is a really unfriendly place. But I promise you, what we're doing, it's again for the safety of the records and the safety of everybody involved. We usually take your purse. We have lockers. But with the advent of electronics, you can bring in a laptop, you bring a camera, you can bring a small personal scanner. You can maybe bring some of your notes. We have a place where you can lay some of your notes out, or we can make copies of your notes for you to refer to. But we don't want to get your notes mixed into the records that we have. If you're looking at volumes, it's a little less of an issue. But if you're looking at a bunch of little pieces of paper, it's easily to get the two mixed. So we're trying to keep those set out. And then lastly is the handling of archival materials. We do have some items that require gloves or a light box or something like that. And we will kind of go over that with you when you're in. So it seems intimidating, but I promise you, still very friendly, still really welcoming, just kind of knowing those things. Don't bring your lunch with you. We probably won't let you in with your lunch. So that's kind of and if you have questions ahead of time, again, click on Ask an Archivist, give us a call and say, hey, this is what we're interested in, and we can get you all prepared for your visit. We do have people who show up now with nothing in hand. They've done it enough times where they're just like, yep, this is me, this is all there is. I will say the other thing that we have that's happened in the last year is we've purchased copy machines that actually take a flash drive. So copies are usually about 25 cents a page depending on what you're copying, but for free you can actually scan the pages you're looking at on our copiers. You can just bring a flash drive. So some people just walk in with a flash drive and here I am, I'm ready. So it's good. Now for some of our other branches, they have slightly different rules. A lot of them are a lot lesser staffed than we are here in Olympia. So a lot of times calling ahead is a good idea. Many of them are closed on Mondays and Tuesdays. So it's good to call ahead and know that, sometime Wednesday through Friday, you'll be able to come in. A lot of them require the appointment ahead of time, although they're, again, not going to just flat out turn you away when you walk up. But it's good to set up an appointment ahead of time. And then that way, they're able to pull things and have things ready for you when you come. So hopefully none of that scares you away. So let's talk a little bit about what sorts of records we can find in there. The way that I've kind of put this presentation together is I'm going to talk to you about records in the sense of how I've interacted with them with people like yourselves who have done research in the archives. So some of these stories are going to be interesting and some of them are going to be a little scandalous, but we'll start with something nice and easy, researching your property. So this is a picture of my house from 1936 here in Olympia. I don't know if you can see them, but there's very tiny little trees in the front yard. You can kind of see the one. They're the little monkey puzzle trees. Let me tell you, they stand well above my roof at this particular moment in time. And every 18 months or so, they produce nuts. And people come and ask for them. So there's that. I was able to get this photograph from the Thurston County Assessor field book and photograph collection that we have at the Southwest Regional Branch. We have scanned most of these. So if you live in Olympia or Tumwater or in Thurston County in general, if you have a street address and a parcel number, you can email that to us and we can send you the field book card and the photograph if there is one. Unfortunately, some of the photographs got separated from their cards either prior to coming to us or after coming to us, and so we have some unclaimed photographs that were scanned. That's usually how that works sometimes. And then this is a collection that we're hoping to eventually put up on our digital archives. The hard part is the indexing portion of that. But King County has a few of their real property cards up on the digital archives, and Spokane County is working on getting some of their cards up on the site. They're going through the digital archives. So what I've found out about my house so far is not a lot. I actually haven't done my property research. However, I've helped tons of other people do it, so I'm very good at it. And I keep telling myself, sometime when I'm doing this, I should do this for my own house. I do know it was built roughly in about 1925. The very earliest pictures we have in this collection start about 1930, 1936, and then they run through about 1975 or so. So I think there might even be some into the 80s, actually, with this collection. The property card itself actually talks about the assessment, which is kind of boring, but it does have a general, like a question mark on the date it was built. It gives a little footprint of the house on the back. Talks a little bit about any additions. So one of the houses that we had looked a lot like, actually looked like a double the size of this house in the very first photograph. And then we looked up a second photograph and it was missing the top layer. So basically what they did is they chopped off the top floor. Which I've always thought people added a second story, not take it away. But when we looked it up, we were like, is this really the same house? But sure enough, we matched up all these different little features, and sure enough, it was. It's 2 photographs. So but a lot of the bulk of them, I'd say bulk of the photographs run in the 50s and 60s. So it's very interesting. And the other thing it will tell you on the property card is a little bit about some of the owners' names. And with those names, you can actually go into our grantor-grantee volumes and look for the deeds. And you can trace how the property went over time. You can either start in present time and say, okay, I own the house, who owned it after me? And there's a little bit of a window of time till about the 80s where you might have to check with the Thurston County auditor to get up to that point. And then you can go backwards through time and see who owned your house, or what type of property it was on, or when the property your house was on was platted. I'm in the 4th Avenue addition. I don't remember the date that it was platted because I'm horrible with dates sometimes. I do remember the house dates just because I've said it so many times. But it can really show a lot of really interesting information. So and you're lucky because if you live in Thurston County, we have a lot of these cards and a lot of these photographs. Some of the other counties in the Southwest region, a little less so, but I have a little smattering from almost every county that we have. So it's very fun. The other thing I've learned about my house is it's possible it was a Tumwater Lumber Company house. And I've seen a couple of footprints that look very similar to the house layout. I've not confirmed that. It's merely only hearsay at this point. But someone did show me a piece out of the catalog that looked a lot like this house. So. Maps. So a lot of people think maps are kind of boring. Sometimes they can be. Sometimes they give a lot more information than you would imagine. And in this particular map case, these are timber cruises. So a timber cruise shows where they've logged or where they will be logging. And you're asking me, why on earth would this be interesting? Well, some of you may be able to see there's a little red circle kind of in the green section there on the map, just to your left, my left, your right of the body of water there. And it says schoolhouse next to it. And this is a 1909 timber cruise from Mason County. And a lot of times we have people trying to find the locations of old schoolhouses. And this particular resource is very helpful in finding exactly where that house may have stood, because oftentimes in the next year's timber cruise or several years later in the timber cruise, that will not appear on the map at all. So it kind of helps you pinpoint where that is. Often there will also be notes that the surveyor would take about things like barns, milk houses, fences, sheds. And if people are trying to look for evidence that their family was indeed on that property, a lot of times with the section, township, and range, you can look for those little structures that will show proof that yes, someone did indeed live here, things that are long gone. I had a woman I worked with in Pacific County that was looking for a schoolhouse, and there was lots of talk about whether it was on this side of the river or the other side of the river or up the river a little further, over here by this bridge, or everybody had a slightly different story. And we went through a lot of records looking to see if we could pinpoint exact location. And finally we were like, oh, let's take a look at the timber cruise and just see what's there. And sure enough, it said exactly where the schoolhouse was. Some surveyor had very meticulously written down, here's the schoolhouse, and circled it and put a little note next to it. And then they'd put a little bit about the building itself in their description. So the bottom half of this page, which I cut off, actually talks a little bit about what types of trees are there, and then any notes that the surveyor decides to make about this particular piece of property. You can see this one's pretty colorful. Some of them are just in pencil, and they're just kind of drawn. Some of the surveyors apparently had a little more time in their hands, and so they brought out full-blown colors and colored pencils and just really, colored the whole landscape. So some of them are really beautiful. But it's a really fun map collection. They can also tell a little bit about the types of lumbering that went on, different lumber companies that are in there. Sometimes they'll list what lumber company had been in there. I know in Pacific County there's a lot of them that mark off where all the cranberry bogs are. So it's a very interesting record, and not one that usually people think of. Now, sadly, for Thurston County, I have very few timber cruises like this. I have the more modern version, which is a really boring piece of paper with a bunch of little dots on it. No actual drawings. I have a little bit from about 1910, and that's about it. And those have just, I think at one point, I don't know that people thought of them as a permanent record. Once they'd logged the area, what do you need to know? And usually assessors kept the record because they wanted to make sure how to tax when the time came. So money is very important. Got to know that. So criminal records. And I don't know, maybe nobody in here has someone from their past that, someone says this great uncle or this great aunt or this cousin twice removed may have done some time in the state pen. But our penitentiary records are rich with information. It's amazing what you can find out in the penitentiary records. So we have penitentiary, reformatory, and then for many of our counties we have the jail registers, or we have mugshot books. I know I have a mugshot book from the Vancouver area during the Prohibition period. So everybody they're all dressed really nicely. There's actually a few that look like fashion photo shoots where a lady's like holding a little dog and she's got this really pretty hat, and like, is this a mugshot or is this a fashion photo or something? So it's very interesting. But in the penitentiary records, but prior to about 1920, there's actually a criminal case file that they kept on each prisoner, and we have a lot of those. They can have letters from home. They can have reports on how the prisoner did while they were incarcerated. But after that, it's mostly the intake form. So it gives their criminal record. And on the intake, a lot of times it'll say whether or not they were married. It'll list their family, parents, and where the parents were from, whether or not they lived with the parents, that sort of thing. This is a record from our clemency files, which come from the governor. So these are people who filed for, or someone on their behalf filed for them to be released from prison. I'll tell you the story of this boy. You may have already heard about him. He's been out there. He's the boy who shot the sheriff. So his name is Herbert Nichols. He had a pretty rough life before he ended up in prison. Around 7 years old, his parents passed away, and he went to live with his grandmother, who liked to beat him on a regular basis, so he would often run away. One of the times he ran away, he had lifted a pistol, and he was trying to steal some food, and he was startled by somebody, and the first thing he did was grab the gun and shoot, and he didn't even know what was happening, but he shot the Asotin County Sheriff in the head, and he did die. Well, the town was ready to hang the boy on site right then and there, but the deputy stepped in and said, he does have to go through. This is 1931, not 1899, so we do have to do things the right way. And so they went ahead and put him on trial, and he was sent to the state penitentiary. Now, while he was in the state penitentiary at the age of 12, he was the youngest inmate at the time, and so he spent a lot of his time away from the general population. They kept him in kind of sequestered away from the rest of the population, and he worked on schoolwork, work on getting his high school diploma, and he had been there a while before his story got to the governor, and the governor heard about him and heard about his past and heard about what he'd been doing in the time that he'd been in prison, and decided in 1941 to pardon him. And he ended up meeting the governor in person, and the governor said this was a good example of how prison life can work for people and turn your life around. He ended up moving to Hollywood and working for 20th Century, and ended up having kids and living a ripe old life. So if you're interested in learning more about him, we have had people, there's a person who's written a book, I think it's called The Boy Who Shot the Sheriff. There's also a short YouTube video on YouTube that where a UW professor has talked about this case in particular. But it's a very interesting case. Lots more like that in the archives. I had a woman call me about a great uncle that she'd heard about, family folklore sort of a thing. And he had left his family of 11 in Cincinnati, Ohio. And I thought that was really weird because I lived in Cincinnati for 13 years, so what are the odds? And he came out to Washington, and he changed his name, I don't know, 3 or 4 times. Got in trouble with the law many times, and then landed himself in the penitentiary, I think for grand larceny. And his clemency file was thick with letters from Cincinnati asking the governor to send this man home to his family because he had a lot of mouths to feed and that sort of thing. And my researcher, she's like, I just want to know what he looked like. I'm just so curious about all this. And so when I scanned and sent her the picture, she's like, he is just an old man. Like, he doesn't even look all that interesting. Or she's like, I had this picture of this really debonair looking man, or, somebody who's really, smooth or slick or something. And she's like, he's just old. And I'm like, well, maybe he just got tired. I don't know. But they ended up sending him back to Cincinnati. So. But she never knew about him, and I guess he may not have actually reconnected with the family, because that's why she didn't know about him. So, and then I'll tell you one other penitentiary. We get a little involved in these penitentiary stories just because they're interesting to find out, well, where did these people come from? And a lot of times the people who are researching know a lot about some of the family members, but they don't really know what ever happened to this one person. So I had this woman who served time in the penitentiary. And she had been married, and and I think the whole reason why we started looking for her in the first place was she was looking for a divorce record. And I ended up finding out, well, there's actually a record where she's been tried for murder. Do you want to know about that? And she's like, definitely. So we went looking, and so her first husband had died, and she was trying to get custody of the rest of her children. And she had tried to, actually the husband had filed against the wife for divorce, it was not allowed, like they decided no. And he had filed against her because she was cruel, she never made him dinner, she hit him with a pan, she did all these things to him. Well, he ended up dying, so they never did get divorced. Well, she started a relationship with another man who came through town, and she murdered him. And she said it was because he'd come along and taken advantage of her good nature, and that she did nothing but treat him well, and she had poisoned him. And of course, in the archives, we're all going, I wonder if she poisoned the husband too. So, and again, when I showed the photograph, when I scanned the photograph for her, she was also an older woman and looked like time had not been kind to her. And so, like, how did she get one man, let alone meet up with this other guy? And the way that she had painted this picture in the trial was that this man had come along and swept her off her feet and tried to take everything she had. And anyways, very interesting. So, fun stories. So, naturalization. And I don't know how many of you know a lot about naturalization or the immigration process over time, but I know that when I ended up in the archives, I had been unaware that at the county level, many naturalizations occurred. I always thought it was a federal thing, but actually many of the superior courts were okay to do the naturalization process and hear the cases. So I did a lot of research about naturalization when I first started. I wrote up kind of a dummy guide to naturalization up on the digital archives to go with our naturalization records. But that is something we do have a lot of, and they show us a lot of really interesting information. Some of the naturalization papers actually also have a photograph of the person. It's rare, it's hard to find. This particular woman was German, and she was declaring her, she wanted to become a U.S. citizen. She was denouncing the German Reich, and this was in 1939. So, very interesting. And you can see there's a lot of information on there. I don't know, some of you guys may be able to see it better than others, but it lists all the family members, where they live. Sometimes it'll list the age. So it gives a lot of information on the forms. The other interesting thing are the people who applied for naturalization and for whatever reason they don't get it. So there'll be a record, a pretty good sized record of people, witnesses coming forward and saying, I know this man, he's a great man, he's been here for a long time, or I know this man, he's not so great of a man. I've known him for a long time and he's probably shouldn't be a U.S. citizen. But usually they try to pick witnesses that will help their cause. But occasionally you'll find ones where they had somebody come in and they gave a negative report to the judge. So there's these papers that kind of talk about what type of person they are, how they work. They're hardworking. They give all these really great adjectives about how they will be help with society and everything else. So it's a really fun record. We do have many of our naturalization records up on the digital archives, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But we also have declarations of intent, which is usually the first document that people sign when they come in if they want to buy property or that never actually naturalized. So a lot of times we'll have the proof that they started the process, or maybe they started the process in Washington, but then finished the process some other place. And then we also have a collection of declarations of intention that came from other states. So we have them from Michigan and Wisconsin and Illinois and all that sort of thing. So it's a fun record. So wills and probate, also a very fascinating record. Probably not as fascinating. I mean, I don't know. I've not really read a modern probate record, so I don't know how they go. But I know for the older ones, every person comes forward who you've ever owed money to. So that's interesting. So almost the whole town, depending on who you are. I've had a couple gentlemen where they own stores. So every bit of inventory in their store is listed in their probate record. So 3 wagons, 2 yokes, 20 chickens, whatever it is. And then a lot of times you will find that people will change their will multiple times, and you'll see that progress over time. Sometimes it's always interesting. Whenever we go to look in a will index, we're always thinking, well, did he write it more than once? And a lot of people never filed their wills, so it's always interesting to find that. But there's a couple of guys who filed several times, and we're like, well, why 5 times? And you go in there, and sure enough, no, that person's not there anymore, that person's not there anymore. Okay. So the wills are prior to death, and the probate are after, and sometimes probate can go on for quite a ways. So we do have indexes for that, and I know that I worked with a couple of ladies in, I think, Northern California, and they had a lot of family in the Lewis County area, and one of the guys that they were looking into had owned a store, but a lot of the other relatives had died and then kind of passed everything on to him, and so when he died, his probate file was a cubic foot box full of documents, because he had a lot of people who he owed money to, and there was a lot of people who owed him money, and then he had the store, and then he had everybody else's stuff. So they were trying to get that all worked out. But a lot of times it will name other family members, it will name children. So if you're stumped with trying to figure out what's going on, sometimes finding the probate record is a good idea. And while I'm telling you this is the Washington State Archives, I'll tell you that this knowledge can also help if you're doing research in other states. So we're not all alike, and everybody does things a little bit differently, but for the most part, this record, something like this record, would exist in other states. So if you're thinking, okay, well, I know that this person died on this date, but I don't really know who else or who would have gotten his property, or maybe we don't think he had any kids, but in fact maybe there was. This is a good way to find that out. So stock certificates, I would have to say, behind property research and penitentiary records, stock certificates are our next highest research request, and it's mostly because somebody was digging through someone's trunk and they found a stock certificate, and they want to know if it's worth any money. And I will say, 9 times out of 10, no. But it's very fascinating. So all the corporations that filed with the Secretary of State's office, we have them going way back, way back, way back. So usually we at least have that initial articles of incorporation. They'll tell you who the stockholders were and that sort of thing, and then they'll tell you what sort of business they were going to have, and they'll kind of write that out in about 5 pages. As we go into more modern times, I would say 50s and 60s, we may actually have some filings that they filed and kept. We often have cards that the Secretary of State's office kept for ease, so they could find people and they could stamp when they paid their dues and that sort of thing. And so oftentimes we'll get somebody, and I chose a mill company because they actually were around for a while, but there are tons of oil and gold and silver that came and went and came and went. That it wasn't. We did have somebody who gave us I think it was a oil company, and I got really excited because I actually passed the 1960s and into the 1980s, and I'm thinking, wow, it's still going from 1909. How does this happen? I got up to about 1981, and that's when it had finally dissipated. The thing of it is that it's still considered an active corporation, even if they buy somebody else out and it rolls into theirs, or if they change their name, file their name change, that can happen. The other thing we often get into is where stockholders and board members decided to try to hide from each other. So, okay, we're going to make this business go away, but now we're going to open it up with a slightly different name, and now we're going to shut that one down. We'll go back to the original name, and then we'll go. So they were trying to avoid people who were trying to collect on their stock. And we've had a few of those where it just 15 different changes. It's like, oh goodness. And then they try to file in different, just slightly out of the county or slightly in a city or something like that. It's very interesting. And then we also have a lot of businesses who have been around for a long time, and they're trying to prove that they've been around for a long time. And sometimes the articles of incorporation did lapse, but then they start up. And so recently we just had contacted by a Pentecostal church, actually, in Walla Walla, who have been around since 1957. But according to their UBI number, they've only been around since 2008. Well, they didn't assign UBI numbers back then, so there's a way to kind of connect those dots. So they have been around for a long time. And I think there's a business on Bainbridge Island that we looked at that had started in 1891 and is still family owned and operated. It's kind of interesting to see that record over time. So if you find a stock certificate, this is one that somebody scanned and sent to me to find out. This is a Hatcher gold mine. And I told them no. Unfortunately, it folded. It actually, they never actually refiled they're supposed to file every year and pay their dues, and they never actually filed after their first. So, but they're very pretty, aren't they? The other one we have is trademarks, and a lot of these are up on the digital archives if you're interested, but I often will go in and just look for businesses that just on an off chance that they do have a trademark listed, and they'll have where people have to register their trademark, and then they'll have a sample of what that trademark looked like. So this is a couple. Any of you guys recognize either of these? They're from a really, really long time ago, but they are from this area. And I was reading them to say, I don't know that I want an artificially sweetened Lucky Pop. The other one, maybe. But as you read the small print, you're kind of like, no, I don't think so. I don't want one of those. But this is something, if you find out in your searches that either a business existed at a location or someone who ran a business owned your house, you can kind of look a little bit more into it and see, well, were they trademarked? Did they have something else going on? And then, of course, the other fun collection that we have, and we currently have a display up in the archives, is the apple crate labels, and we have a lot of those really beautiful, and salmon can labels and that sort of thing. It's a really pretty artwork. So court case files. Again, very good reading. If you ever just want to come by the archives and read about something, just for what it's hard. It's so hard when you work with the records to not sit down and read it all the time, and so this is from a case that I worked on where Frank Lang apparently used one of those newfangled machines and didn't get proper training in 1909. No, it's 1900, sorry, even earlier. They had just gotten a newfangled machine at the Centralia Shingle Making Company, And he, being an infant under the age of 21, he was 19, everybody. But each time they filed the complaint, they changed like what he was. And I looked that up and I was like, does that mean he was simple? No, it does not. It means he was just younger than, usually the age of 14 is when they would use that term. But he was actually under the age of 21. And they were basically saying that they got this newfangled machine in and he was supposed to run it. And unfortunately, he got his fingers chopped off. And so they were trying to sue the company for as much, well, damages and so forth. And his brother, originally, it said Frank Lang versus the company, and then they filed the complaint again with him, and then they started adding in, oh, he's an infant under the age of 21, and oh, his legal guardian is his older brother. So trying to see if that would help at all. So it was very, very interesting. But they also changed the story each time and made it more graphic. So I'm thinking to myself, in 1900, who files this very fascinating story? So when you look at the very first filing and then you look at the very last filing, it changes, it gets longer, more verbose, more floral, very vivid. So it's a very interesting case. But again, these are very interesting. People sue other people. I think there was a case where these two property owners, I think it was, Hatfields and McCoys only out here. So they literally, like, no sooner is one person closed out one case against the other one, and it is like for several years, just like ping, 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 ping. This person suing this person, this person suing this person. Just back and forth. Their cow was on my property. They left a piece of lumber touching, my property line. So very interesting. But it can also be interesting as far as if you're doing genealogy or doing historical research about the area, just to know it'll talk about their professions, it'll talk about the lawyers who filed the things in the case. I'll talk to you a little bit about how court fees have changed over time. So there's lots of other things you can glean from court case files. Now, for court case files, the county clerk is in fact the permanent record holder, and that is the way that is. But a lot of times what will happen is many of the court case files will work its way towards the archives, especially if they've been historically significant or a notorious criminal or something that was somebody really scandalous in the area or some government official who got sued. That's usually how that works. And so it can be very interesting. Divorce. Another type of case file that I find fascinating, mostly because for the longest time I didn't think people divorced back then, which apparently is not true. I also thought that if a woman filed against the man, most of the time the women wouldn't win. That's also not true. Well, at least it is for all the women that I've looked up, for a lot of people who've researched. So this particular case, Peter, the husband, filed twice in previous 2 years against his wife for cruel and unusual punishment. That's cruel. That's exactly what he said, cruel and unusual punishment, and that she had left him cold and hungry, and when he was sick, she wouldn't make him soup. He listed this whole thing of complaints twice over, and twice over the judge denied it, or they did nothing with it. They never made anything. Well, she must have gotten fed up because she filed against him. A year later, he also accused her of sleeping with a friend of theirs. So he said she'd been unfaithful, said their youngest child looked a lot like him, and so that was his proof. Well, you laugh, but I have to tell you, we wonder, because I had a woman contact me from Wisconsin, and they had family members who'd moved there from Switzerland, along with his other family, this family we see here. So a brother and sister from her family moved to Clark County, Washington. She's like, why on earth would they do that? Turns out that couple also moved to Clark County, Washington. They lived very close together. They were very good friends, apparently. And she did name her youngest son a form of the brother's name, this friend of theirs. Well, she was like, I wonder if they were always together. But the wife says flat out her husband was a deadbeat. That's why she wanted to divorce him. And so the judge actually gave her the property, gave her the kids, and told the husband to go fly a kite. Now, the brother and sister who came down with them, the sister married a man, and I think she married him right when they first got here, and she wanted to divorce him, but the first time didn't. The second time it did work, and she changed her will, but right before she died, she left everything to her ex-husband and married him about a month prior. So you got to wonder what's happening there. Of course, after all of this happens in the courts, it kind of goes cold, so it's all a bunch of supposition as far as what happened. But I kept talking to this lady in Wisconsin, and she's like, this sounds like something that, we would watch on the soap opera or something. I was like, you're probably right. She's like, I've always wondered about this. And she wondered if, because the brother was so close to the sister, she wondered about that. But then it turns out the brother had somebody else because he was involved with this other woman. So anyway, so fascinating stuff. I want to say that I think this was 1895, by the way. 1895. Would you think I was talking about 1895? No. Definitely no. So, yeah, very interesting. So, we also have a big photograph collection. Government records and photographs are not always sometimes hand in hand. So, some of the photographs can be kind of interesting, boring maybe? I don't know. We'll see. Department of Transportation is one of the largest photograph collections we have, and I will say that it's highways being built and bridges going in, and then sometimes it catches things in the background, which is really interesting. And then, of course, state buildings going up and stuff like that we will have. But we also have a couple private collections in our collection. The Susan Parish collection, there's a part of it in our collection. We're in the process of indexing that, and that has a lot of local area photographs in it. And then lastly, I'll just touch on the governor's records. The governor's records, they are rich with information. Anything that ever happened in the United States happened to Washington as well, and often it's discussed in the governor's records. So if you want to talk about the CCC, the WPA, if you want to talk about the Vietnam War, and in this particular case, the Vietnamese resettlement after the Vietnam War, the Vietnamese were fleeing the area and they wanted to come into the United States. California and Oregon both turned them away, and Governor Evans in Washington said, come on in. And so there's some really amazing files. We had a reporter from the Seattle Times come down, and her father was one of those men, and she did a story for the Seattle Times on this, and looking at the governor's records. It was really incredible. And of course, genealogy. We work a lot with Family Search. Family Search actually comes in and photographs a lot of our records and puts them up on their website. And while they're not all indexed, you can flip through a lot of these images. And so this is kind of an example of what they have: different county records, deeds, marriage records, probate, a lot of those, land records. And then, of course, we have our digital archives. We are right now, so far, Oregon's getting close. We have a couple other states that have tried and then haven't quite been able to maintain it. But we're the only government-owned digital archives. There are lots of digital collections out there, but as far as government-created government records up on the digital archives, this is it. Your best bet, honestly, less is more. So if you're doing a keyword search, try to think of the most general first before going more specific. And because we do have people who transcribe who may or may not have always been able to read handwriting, you might want to anticipate that when you search and do like first initial, last name, or first name, last initial, that sort of thing when you do searching. But if you do come across a record that is misspelled, we want to know about it. So we have a way for, if you're in a record and you see that it's misspelled, to go ahead and send us a message to saying, hey, I know this isn't right, can you change it? If the record keeper, the government entity, spelled it wrong, they spelled it wrong, there's not much we can do about it, but you guys can add a comment to that record so that when at any time a researcher comes by, they'll know that it's the right person. If the transcriber did it wrong, which that does happen quite a bit, we can actually change it, and we'll usually send you an email and say, okay, we've got this updated. So And that's for anything that we have. We've had people talk to us about our photograph collections and different things, and we have had a lot of student helpers when they've helped us, and I will say more and more, the students and the cursive, not so much. So I have a couple guides that I give to students for that, but sometimes it's still really difficult. They're just not used to seeing it every day. So there's a way for you to fill it out on the digital archives, giving some, whether it's a correction or a question or transcription error. You can fill out the information, then we get back to you. So talking about the digital archives, we have digitized a lot of records. A lot of people think that we digitize everything. Well, we haven't digitized everything because it's a lot of stuff. I would say our digital archives, while it has a lot of records, I think it's a little over 500,000 at this point, getting closer by the day to what's up there. But I'd say that's like the tip of my thumb in comparison to what exists as far as paper is concerned. And while we do get help with imaging, the one thing we don't get a lot of help with is the indexing part of it. And we are losing the resource as far as like who can read records so that they're able to. And some of them are typewritten, but a lot of them are still in cursive. So one of the things we advertise a little bit is that we do have a volunteer program that's entirely online. So you can actually do this in your pajamas while you're watching your favorite TV show, with a cup of coffee, whenever you feel like it. And we have researchers who have their own self-interest in mind. They're looking for something specific, so they go ahead and work on transcribing a particular collection. But we have this thing called Scribe, and it has its own website, and I have a postcard in the back that talks a little bit about that. You create an account and a password, and then you can just log in at any time and help us get things logged up. The way we have it set up, it used to be that someone would have an Excel spreadsheet and the paper records, and then someone would have to, it was really kind of hard, difficult to get things up. Well, now we get as long as 2 transcribers match, it automatically puts the record up on there. That way there's a little bit of a checks and balances. So it looks something like this. They'll have a record up there, and then you just have some fields you have to fill out. So it's kind of fun. I have to admit, sometimes I spend a little more time than I should doing that, but it can be kind of fun. So that's kind of our little Scribe program. If you're interested, like I said, there's some cards back there about that, and that helps us get more records out. And I will say a lot of people like to use our records. We have people from all over the world who are benefit. We have people who need to get things for insurance or to proof of divorce or proof of insurance or proof of marriage or all this sort of thing. And even if they're overseas, they can order it online and get it sent their way. And then if you're interested in keeping up with our archives news, we do have an Out of the Archives newsletter. It comes out monthly, and it kind of just highlights a little bit, kind of like what I did today, talk a little bit about some of the collections that we have. They talk about some of the events that we have going on. They have a photo challenge. They have a photograph that goes up and people can call in. And then we also have our Historic Records Project listing. If you become a volunteer, they send that out as well, about all the new and different things that are coming into the archives. So if you have any questions, feel free to call me or email me. There's my phone number and my email address. I also have cards around. And if you Washington State Archives, anytime at all that you want to call in and just ask for me by name, ask away, everyone. If you have any questions today, feel free. I'll take questions if you have any. Yes?
Territorial records, where are they?
They're here in Olympia. I think our oldest record for county is about 1847, and then we have the state territorial starting about 1853. So, and then we do have some territorial records are out and about as well. So some in Oregon and some in like some of the governors, they went to school back east, so they sent some of their stuff back. But we do have some copies and some microfilm of some of that stuff as well. All right, that's all the way back. Yep.
Do you encourage community members who have pictures, or old documents to bring them to the archives?
We don't, because we primarily collect government records. But if it has to do with the history of the area, we definitely will appraise. And then the other thing is we may also suggest a very appropriate place for them to go, whether it be the Washington State Historical Society or the Lacey Museum or one other collection that's in the area. So we'll help you find a good home for them if we can't take them.
You mentioned the flash drives for making copies. That's just from your copier scanner, it's not from the microfilm machines that you have.
Right. The microfilm machines, sadly, are still, yes, and they're slowly dying. Now, some people have had some luck taking photographs of the microfilm, and we are hoping to get a new reader that is hooked up to a computer. We have one of our staff people trying one out right now to see how it works, and I hope, fingers crossed, that we'll get one of those, because the two we have they're dying fast, and it's hard to find replacement toner and all that kind of stuff for it, and repairs. Nobody knows what they are. Yes?
I just have a question. I'm really interested in genealogical research. My question for you is, as most Americans, I'm very mobile, my family's very mobile. I find that I need some way to communicate from one archive to another. What is your level of connectivity as far as your archive to other archives out there? Because sometimes when you're going through an archive, you'll end up in a dead end. There's nowhere else to go.
Right, right.
You have any advice you can offer on that?
So usually, depending on the archives, we may be able to suggest another place to go that will have what you're looking for. And then, unfortunately, a lot of archives, you're right, are very archaic and that you cannot find what they even have. But I'm telling you, a phone call sometimes will help kind of the frustration of trying to, pick up where to go or make that trip and find that there's nothing there. And there is a Northwest Digital Archive that lists some finding aids online, and it's not up to date, but it's at least something. And for a long time, a lot of agencies put their finding aids up there. It may not be current, but there's a lot of them there. And then, like I said, if you talk to any one of the archives that are around, we can often sometimes say, well, if it's not here, here's another place to go. Call and ask.
You have different government agencies, and you and the state library, for example, are under the Secretary of State. How well do you cooperate with them, and when you direct people to the library as opposed to coming to you, and maybe do you deal with other states' archives like Oregon? We were so closely associated with Oregon.
So we do send a lot of people Oregon's way, and Oregon sends a lot of people our way. We know a little bit about what collections they do have, and then the state library, when you're thinking about, they do have a lot of manuscript collections, and they have a lot of map collections, but think about in terms of published material, they have more published material and manuscripts than we actually have. I'd say personal manuscripts is the other thing they have collected over time, whereas ours are primarily all government created. So that's kind of where our lines are different, and we try really hard to, I know a lot of times newspaper, you need to search a newspaper before you start looking at what we're looking at, or you look at what we're looking at, and then now that puts you to the newspaper. So we usually kind of work back and forth as far as being able to send researchers back and forth. We are having an open house on Saturday, the 24th of this month. There are some flyers in the back. It's from 10 to 2 in the afternoon. There'll be some speakers talking about organizing your personal electronic records, talking about genealogy. We'll have the state archivist there. If you have a stump on the genealogical front, he will help try to break down those brick walls. We also have a couple gentlemen talking about bridges. This month it's Archives Month, and our theme is Bridging Washington. And Craig Holstein from the Washington State Department of Transportation and Bob Creer worked together on putting some of those bridges on the National Register. So they're going to be doing a little talk in the afternoon. And then we'll also be giving tours of the archives. So if that interests you at all, feel free to come and visit us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.